we have conveniently placed the configuration of the .NET backend all in one place. Well, sort of in one place. At least it's discoverable in one place, and then from there you're able to find what you need. So let me just close these, and I'll start from the beginning so that you can get an idea of where to find things. So in the web, the web is the web project is basically the API. It's the web layer or the presentation layer, and so that's where pretty much everything comes together. And so any infrastructure code is also going to be a part of that web project. So you may have already seen the controllers. We've got an employee controller and a status controller, but there's also a folder in here for infrastructure. Now, before I move on to infrastructure, I will point out the program file. The program file is kind of like that index.js that's at the core, at the root of a Node.js project that basically just kicks everything off. That's what this program is, and it is considered a console application in .NET terms. And this file is basically just going to be executed when the application starts. So this main method here is the first thing that's going to be executed, and we're going to do a few things in here. We are using .env.environment so that we can use files like this .env file in our local systems, and then we are able to just delete that and use system environment variables in other environments. Then here you can just see that it's getting a few things set up. This is for logging, and it's also going to optionally configure logly as a logger if the environment variables are there. Then it's going to do this right here. This is a try catch that is trying to wrap this method right here, because this is the method that actually starts the entire application. It bootstraps everything and gets everything running. And if there's ever any kind of exception that happens here, it should, if it bubbles up all the way to the top, it should come here to this catch, and then we will log it and then return a 1, so that whatever application is calling this will register the error code as well. So this method, create web host builder, is down here, and this is basically what's going on here. It's creating the default builder, which is using the builder pattern to build this web host. It's using configuration from the startup file, and it's also using environment variables, and it's also using Serilog for logging. Now, this startup is where I want to focus the rest of the discussion in this video. The startup file it has a few methods in it that ASP.NET looks for and is going to try to execute at different times during the bootstrapping process, during the startup process. And after it executes the startup file, then the API is actually available to the public for consumption. So let's go into this startup file. You will see this boilerplate attribute in different places, and the idea with this is it doesn't do anything in our code, but when we run our coverage, our unit test coverage tool, it will ignore classes that have this attribute on them. So that's helpful. The startup comes with this configuration injected automatically, and so that we're able to use this configuration. Configuration in this case is used mostly for environment variables. So if you ever need an environment variable, you can just do configuration like you see here. Configuration with the square brackets and then the actual name of the environment variable, and then you'll have it. So let's walk through the methods here. There is configure services, and there's also just configure. So we'll start with just configure for right now. I believe that's the first thing that's actually, or maybe the second thing that gets run. So it has a couple of things here injected. It's got the app and it's got the environment. So both of these are useful in different ways. We will take a look here at the app, how it's being used. here you can see that if the configuration environment is development, if we're in the development environment, then we want to do a few things that we wouldn't normally do in production. For instance, we want to set up the app to for development mode, which is going to increase debugging levels. It's going to do several things to the compiled code to make it just easier to read if we're trying to debug something. Because of that, it's going to run slower. So it's not good for production because we want the production to be at the peak performance, and if debugging is very, very available, then the code is going to be slower. So this is only for development. And then also, if we're in development mode, we want to actually use the exception page that's for developers. We want it to give us the most information possible in exception output. So then if it's not, then it's going to use HSTS. We can drill into this a little bit. And this is just going to use the HSTS middleware. All right, there we go. So I don't know if you could tell, but I don't know what in the world HSTS is. I guess I should Google it. Let's just do that right now. I was hoping that if I could drill into that method, I would know what the heck it was. HSTS, ASP.NET Core. And see, this is what you should do too. If you find something that you don't really know what it is, then you should Google it right away, and then you'll know. Okay, so it's basically just enforcing HTTPS. So if it doesn't, if you try to access the endpoint without HTTPS, then it will either it'll reject it, or it will redirect it to HTTPS. So you can even look at the IntelliSense that says which adds the strict transport security header. I guess I could have read that and maybe understood it. Anyway, so the rest of these things are also pretty self-explanatory. We're going to use authentication. We want to. Here we go. Here's where it's going to redirect HTTPS. So if it's not HTTPS, it'll redirect it. It's going to use MVC. I'm actually not sure if this is necessary, but we'll leave it there for right now. It's going to use this middleware, which we'll get into middleware in a little while, and then we'll also use this middleware. So we've got a unit of work middleware and an exception handler middleware, and then it's going to migrate the database. So these are things that are going to happen at the beginning of the execution of the application. Sometimes these things are created by us. Sometimes they're created by Microsoft or another group. So like if you try to drill into this one. I'm pressing F12 on my keyboard, by the way. Then it takes you into a Microsoft assembly, and you don't really get you get to see the code, but it's there are other things going on here, and we're not sure what it's going on. This one, however, I believe was created by us. Yes. So this is a middleware that we created, and it's really sorry, it's not even a middleware. It's just an extension method that extends the iApplication builder. That's how we're able to put this .migrate database. So if you look here, it's really just using the app, getting this service factory. It's getting a required service, which is the app data context. That's the entity framework database context, and it's just calling it to migrate the database, get it up to date with where it should be. That way, every time you start the database, it tries to run any new migrations that haven't been run on the database yet. So that is the configuration application, the application configuration method. Then, and the application configuration method actually at some point triggers the calling of the configure services. The configure services method has an iServices service collection, which is, we'll show that to you real quick. Well, not really much to see here. It's giving us a list of, or a collection of service descriptors. But there are a lot of extension methods that hang off of that iService collection. For instance, well, I may have to come back to that. Well, for instance, add MVC or add MVC here is an extension method that is on service collection, and so you can see here it's basically it's doing a bunch of little things here to try to configure. We could have done these things ourselves. We could have just not used add MVC. We could have added these things ourselves individually, but it's kind of nice to have one method that kind of does it all for us. So let's take a look at some of these right here. Now, before, as we were building this bootstrapper, this startup, the class was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's okay because we were building it. It was having a lot of instability and flux. So we allowed it to get bigger and bigger. But then once it started to stabilize, not as many changes coming, we moved these different tasks out to different files so that it's more manageable. So the startup CS is still our starting point for the application. It's where we try to configure everything, but these different things are out in separate files. These are built with extension methods, very much like you saw with this add MVC. That is an extension method, and then these are also extension methods. So if I'm going to drill into one of these, and this is basically the template that you should follow if you are going to create any more configuration tasks that need to be used in the startup. So don't add that actual code to the startup itself. You need to add it in an extension method like this, and then you need to use that extension method in the startup. So let's look at this real quick. If you haven't seen how to make an extension method before, the main thing, there are three things that make something an extension method. One is that it comes from a static class. The class has to be a static class if it's going to be an extension method. Also, the method itself has to be a static method. And then lastly, you use the this keyword as the first argument in the method. Now you can have more arguments, but the first one must be this. The combination of those three things makes a method an extension method. And then once that is true, then you're able to hang that extension method or use that extension method on the type that is this. So you see here, we're using iService collection as the this. And so this services is an iService collection. Therefore, we can do dot configure environment variables. Configure environment variables. See there? So then we have access to the services that came from the startup file, and we're able to use it and act upon it. Now in this case, I chose to return the same iServices collection so that we can do this, so that we can just do dot 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 all the way down, and not have to do services dot services dot services dot. It's just a little trick to make things more fluent. So here you can see that we're using add env, which is a something that comes from .env, the .dotenv. It's hard to say, which is what I said. It pulls environment variables either out of the system or out of the .env file, which helps with local debugging and things like that. So we'll take a look at another one. Configure database context. Now here you can see that I've got a couple of arguments here in this method, which means that our extension method is going to have actually 3 arguments. It has this, which is the one that is required for the extension method, and then we also have our other 2. And so from here we're able to use the services and add our database context, and we are passing in if it's a development environment or not, because if it is a development environment and there is no connection string, then we want to actually use SQLite and use a testing database. And then we have here to enable the sensitive data logging so that we can see what kind of data is going in. We can see the SQL statements in the logs in the console log and things like that. Much more useful. And here you already saw this. This was the database migrate or migrate database. Again, where you see this, and then you see the thing that it should hang off of. and then we have access to it here. So I'm not going to show you every single one of these, but this is basically the idea that if you want to configure something on services, then you should create an extension method and then utilize it here so that we don't dirty up our startup file with a lot of extra methods. We can just use them here. Let me just look through this really quick to see if there's anything else that that you might want to know more about. Basically, also the names of these should be self-explanatory to future developers. Remember that you're not the only one that's going to be working in your code base. You need to make sure that the names that you choose are useful for other people. So here, if you're ever wondering where you should change configuration for your web dependencies or for your dependency injection, you can just kind of look for the word dependency or look for the word injection or something like that, and you can kind of find, okay, here's data dependency, so I'm going to try that. Well, here is an example of one class, one static class that actually has 3 extension methods. So you can see static, 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 this, this, this. So all 3 of these things are extension methods, and this is fine too. These are very logically grouped together because they all have to do with dependencies. So it's not necessary to have an exactly separate file for each one, as long as it makes sense that they're together. And here you can see that it's using the services to do its work. We could have added all these things, the add scoped, add from assembly scan. We could have done all those things in the same startup file, but it would have been really, really messy and lots of stuff going on there. This one's for configuring AutoMapper. There may be something that comes along for you that is something that you need to configure. So what you need to do is just create an extension method very similar to this, and then utilize it in your startup, and you'll be fine. I hope this has helped, and we'll see you next time.